Ambassador Idris Okonkwo stood at the entrance of the Concord Council chamber and waited. He had been waiting for 3 hours now. His legs were tired, his back ached, and his mouth was dry, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the door in front of him, a massive slab of polished black stone that had not opened once since he arrived. Behind that door, 4,000 species decided the fate of the galaxy. Humanity was not one of them. Earth had been part of the galactic community for over 200 years. In all that time, humans had never been given a seat on the council. They were classified as a Class 7 minor species, a label that meant they were allowed to exist, allowed to trade in limited quantities, and allowed to settle a small number of colony worlds. But they were not allowed to vote, they were not allowed to speak unless spoken to, and they were certainly not allowed to complain. Idris had come to Nexus Prime 17 times in the past 5 years. Each time, he carried documents, proposals, and evidence of humanity's growth. Each time, he was told to wait. Each time, the door stayed closed a little longer than before. A tall figure with silver skin and 4 arms walked past him without looking down. Then another. Then a group of small, insect-like creatures who chittered among themselves and made a wide circle around him as if he carried a disease. Idris kept his face calm. He had learned long ago that showing emotion in this place was a mistake. The galaxy did not respect human feelings. The galaxy barely respected humans at all. Finally the door opened. A council attendant, a thin blue-skinned creature with no visible eyes, gestured for him to enter. Idris straightened his coat and walked inside. The chamber was enormous. Thousands of seats rose in a great circle around the central platform. Most of them were filled. The noise was overwhelming. Clicks, hisses, musical tones, deep rumbles. The sound of a galaxy talking to itself. Idris stepped onto the platform and began to speak. He talked about the Velari Dominion, a powerful reptilian empire that held 12 seats on the council. He explained that the Velari had been moving warships into neutral space near human colonies. He presented sensor data, communication intercepts, and satellite images. He asked the council for protection, or at least for an official investigation. The council listened the way a parent listens to a child, asking for candy before dinner. Some members whispered to each other. The Velari representative, a massive creature covered in dark green scales, simply stared at Idris with yellow eyes and said nothing. When Idris finished, the council speaker thanked him for his concerns and moved to the next item on the agenda. Idris walked out of the chamber with the same calm face he had walked in with. But inside, something cracked. Just a little. Just enough. 6 weeks later, the colony world of Alisium died. It happened on a Tuesday. The people of Alisium were going about their ordinary lives. Children walked to school. Farmers tended their crops. Engineers maintained the atmospheric generators that kept the air clean and breathable. 11 million people lived on Alisium. It was humanity's largest colony, its proudest achievement, and for many, the proof that humans could build something beautiful among the stars. The first blast came at 9:14 in the morning, local time. A beam of white energy struck the capital city from orbit and turned it into glass and ash in less than a second. Before anyone could scream, a second blast hit the agricultural district, then a third, then a fourth. The ships in orbit were unmarked. They carried no flags, broadcast no identification, and answered no hails. They fired for 6 hours straight. When they were done, they left as silently as they had come. 11 million people, gone. The distress signal reached Earth 14 hours later. It was broken, full of static, and barely understandable. But the message was clear enough. Elysium was burning, and no one was coming to help. Earth's intelligence services worked through the night. Within 48 hours, they had the answer. The energy signatures from the orbital bombardment matched Velari military weapons. The trajectory of the attacking ships traced back to Velari staging areas. The attack had not been random. It had been planned, approved, and executed by the Velari Dominion. Ambassador Okonkwo did not wait for an appointment this time. He walked into the Concord Council chamber during a live session, something no minor species had ever done. Guards moved to stop him, but the cameras were already watching, and the galaxy was already listening. He stood on the central platform and held up a single image, a photograph taken by a rescue drone. It showed a field of ash where a school had once stood. Small shapes were visible in the gray dust. They were the size of children. 11 million, Idris said. His voice did not shake. 11 million people, our people, killed by Velari weapons, fired from Velari ships, launched from Velari space. We have the proof. We are showing it to you now. All we ask, all we have ever asked, is for justice. The chamber was silent for a long time. Then the council speaker cleared her throat and said that the matter would be reviewed, and that a committee would be formed to assess the evidence. She reminded Ambassador Okonkwo that unauthorized entry into the chamber was a violation of Concord law, and asked him to leave. Idris looked around the room. 4,000 species. Not one of them met his eyes. He left the chamber for the last time. Back on Earth, the United Defense Council met in a room that did not officially exist. It was buried deep underground, shielded from every known form of surveillance, and accessible only to 12 people in the entire world. The Secretary General sat at the head of the table. She was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands. She had led humanity through 2 economic crises and a plague. She had always believed in diplomacy, in patience, in the long game. She looked at the faces around the table. Generals, scientists, intelligence directors. Every one of them had read the reports. Every one of them had seen the photographs from Elysium. Every one of them was waiting for her to speak. The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes before something breaks and never goes back together. The Secretary General placed both hands flat on the table and took a slow breath. "Wake the architects," she said. No one asked what she meant. They all knew. They had been preparing for this moment for 100 years, hoping it would never come, knowing that it would. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, machines that had been sleeping for decades began to hum. The Himalayas had kept many secrets over the centuries, but none were as deep or as dangerous as the one buried 12 kilometers beneath the mountain called Annapurna. The elevator ride took 9 minutes. General Kofi Asante stood inside the steel box and felt the temperature drop with every passing second. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into a corridor carved from solid rock, lit by pale blue lights that stretched into the distance like the spine of some sleeping beast. This was Cradle Station, the most classified facility on Earth. It had no official name, no budget line, and no entry in any government database. Fewer than 300 people in the entire history of humanity had ever set foot here. And what they had built inside these walls would have terrified every species in the galaxy if any of them had bothered to look. General Asante walked through the corridor until he reached a sealed door marked with a single word, Architect. He placed his hand on the scanner. The door opened with a soft hiss, and cold air rushed out. Inside, rows of cryogenic pods lined the walls like coffins standing on end. Most were dark, but one, the one in the center, was glowing. Dr. Lena Vasquez opened her eyes for the first time in 11 years. It took her body 3 hours to fully wake up. It took her mind about 6 minutes. She sat on the edge of a medical bed, wrapped in a thermal blanket, reading a datapad that contained everything: the attack on Elysium, the Concord's refusal to act, and the Secretary-General's order. She did not cry. She did not shout. She read every word, put the datapad down, and said, "Show me the fleet." The world knew humanity as a minor species, a young civilization, clever perhaps, aggressive certainly, but ultimately harmless, too small, too weak, and too short-lived to matter. This was exactly what humanity wanted the world to think. 112 years ago, Earth's greatest minds had gathered in secret and asked a simple question: what happens when the galaxy decides we are a threat? The answer was obvious. The Concord would unite against them. Humanity would be destroyed, scattered, or enslaved. It had happened before to other species. The galaxy did not tolerate rivals. So humanity made a choice. It would hide, not its people, not its culture, but its true strength. On the surface, Earth would remain a minor species, polite, quiet, and forgettable. Beneath the surface, the architects would build. And build they did. Vasquez was led through a tunnel that opened into an underground cavern so large it had its own weather system. Clouds drifted near the ceiling, 2 kilometers above, and below those clouds, arranged in perfect rows like sleeping giants, sat the Leviathan fleet. 200 warships. Each one was black, smooth, and shaped like a blade. They had no visible engines, no weapon ports, no windows. They looked less like ships and more like pieces of darkness given solid form. These ships did not use the standard faster-than-light drives that the rest of the galaxy relied on. Those drives were slow, predictable, and easy to track. The Leviathan fleet used something else: fold space drives. Instead of traveling through space, the ships folded space around themselves and stepped from one point to another, like a person stepping through a door. The journey from Earth to the far side of the galaxy took less than 4 seconds. No other civilization had this technology. No other civilization even knew it was possible. But the ships were only part of it. Dr. Vasquez walked past the fleet and entered a second chamber. Smaller, but far more heavily guarded. Armed soldiers stood at every door. The air hummed with energy. In the center of the room sat a black sphere, roughly 2 meters wide, suspended in a magnetic field. It pulsed with a faint red light, like a heartbeat. This was Project Fenrir. Fenrir was not a weapon. It was something worse. It was an artificial intelligence designed for one purpose: war. It could control millions of drones, missiles, and defense platforms simultaneously, across any distance, with 0 delay. It could analyze an enemy fleet in milliseconds, and develop a counter-strategy before the enemy had finished firing their first shot. It learned, it adapted, and it never forgot. Dr. Vasquez had designed Fenrir herself, 23 years ago. She had hoped, more than anything, that it would never be turned on. She placed her hand on the sphere. It was warm. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. The red pulse quickened. While Earth prepared in silence, the rest of the galaxy continued to ignore it. The Velari Dominion celebrated its successful operation against the human colony. The attack had gone exactly as planned: quick, brutal, and untraceable. Or so they believed. Within the Velari military command, the destruction of Alisium was considered a minor event, a pest removal, nothing more. But not everyone agreed. Commander Rethus sat alone in his quarters, aboard the Velari warship Burning Claw, and stared at his tactical display. Something was wrong. His sensors had picked up unusual energy readings from the Sol system, Earth's home system. The readings were brief, almost invisible, but they were there. Massive power spikes, deep underground, in patterns that matched no known technology. He filed a report with his superiors. He recommended a reconnaissance mission to investigate. He argued that the humans might be more dangerous than anyone believed. His superiors read the report, laughed, and filed it in the garbage. "They are insects," his commanding officer told him. "They build their little nests, we burn them down. That is how the galaxy works." Rethus said nothing, but he saved a copy of the report and kept watching the Sol system. Something was waking up down there, and he could feel it in his bones. She reviewed every system, every weapon, every line of code in Fenrir's neural network. She argued with generals about targets and tactics. She demanded rules of engagement that minimized civilian casualties. She was cold, precise, and absolutely terrifying to everyone around her. But late at night, when the corridors were empty, she would stand in front of the Leviathan fleet and stare at the black ships in silence. She had built them to protect humanity. Now they were about to be used to wage war, and she knew better than anyone what they were capable of. On the 12th day, the fleet was ready. 200 ships rose from their underground cradles and broke through the surface of the earth like whales breaching the ocean. They tore through the atmosphere, scattering clouds, and assembled in orbit around the planet. The galaxy noticed 200 unknown warships appearing from nowhere around a world that was supposed to have a defense force of 32 outdated frigates. The Concord's monitoring stations lit up with alerts. Diplomats sent frantic messages. Intelligence agencies scrambled to understand what they were seeing. The Velari detected the fleet as well. Commander Rethus watched the readings from his quarters and felt his blood go cold. He sent one final message to Velari High Command. "I was right. Prepare yourselves." This time, nobody laughed. The Leviathan fleet did not wait for permission. It did not announce its departure. It did not file a flight plan with the Concorde. It simply folded space and vanished. 4 seconds later, 200 black warships appeared in orbit above Elysium, the burned, shattered colony world that the galaxy had already forgotten. Thousands of rescue pods launched from the ships and fell toward the surface like seeds, carrying food, water, medicine, and shelter for any survivors still hiding in the ruins. But the fleet did not stop at Elysium. It was already folding space again, already moving, already heading toward the one place the galaxy never expected humanity to go. Straight into the heart of Velari space. The wrath of Earth was coming, and it was 4 seconds away from everywhere. The Velari Border Defense Fleet was the pride of the Dominion. 800 warships, each one built from reinforced titanium alloy and armed with plasma cannons capable of melting asteroids into vapor. They had crushed rebellions, conquered systems, and never, not once in 400 years, lost a battle. They lasted 47 minutes against the Leviathan fleet. The battle at the Carval threshold began when the Velari detected 200 unknown ships dropping out of fold space at the edge of their territory. Admiral Sorath, the Velari fleet commander, was an experienced warrior with 60 years of service. He looked at the numbers, 800 against 200, and felt confident. He ordered his fleet into attack formation and opened fire. The first volley was the largest concentration of firepower ever unleashed by a Velari fleet. Thousands of plasma bolts crossed the void, each one carrying enough energy to destroy a city. They struck the black human ships head-on. Nothing happened. The plasma bolts hit the nanocomposite hulls of the Leviathan ships and were absorbed like rain falling into the ocean. The hulls rippled, shifted color for a moment, and then returned to black. The ships did not slow down. They did not change course. They kept coming. Admiral Sorath ordered a second volley. Same result. A third. Same result. The human ships were learning. Every time they were hit, their hulls analyzed the weapon frequency, adapted, and became immune to it. By the fourth volley, the plasma bolts were bouncing off like light reflecting off a mirror. Then the human ships fired back. They used no plasma, no missiles, no weapons that the Velari had ever seen. Instead, thin lines of white light extended from the nose of each Leviathan ship. focused gravity beams that could pull a warship apart at the molecular level. The beams cut through Velari shields like they were not there. They cut through armor like it was paper. They cut through ships like they were made of air. The first 100 Velari warships were destroyed in under 3 minutes. The next 100 lasted slightly longer because they tried to run. They did not get far. Project Fenrir coordinated the attack with perfect, terrible precision. Each Leviathan ship knew where every enemy vessel was, where it was going, and what it would do next. There was no confusion, no wasted shots, no hesitation. It was not a battle. It was mathematics. Admiral Sorath watched from his command ship as his fleet was taken apart piece by piece. When his own shields failed and his hull began to groan, he stood up from his chair and said a prayer to the old gods of the Velari. He died standing. Of the 800 Velari warships, none survived. Of the 200 Leviathan ships, 3 were damaged. None were destroyed. The battle at Carval threshold was over. The galaxy found out within hours. Battle telemetry, sensor data, ship recordings, emergency transmissions leaked across every communication network in the Concord. Billions of beings on thousands of worlds watched in disbelief as the most feared military in the galaxy was wiped out in less than an hour by a species they had dismissed as insects. On Nexus Prime, the Concord Council held an emergency session. The chamber that had once ignored Ambassador Okonkwo was now filled with panic. Representatives shouted over each other. Some demanded that the Concord unite against humanity. Others argued that Earth was within its rights to respond to the massacre at Elysium. A few simply sat in stunned silence, recalculating everything they thought they knew about the small blue world on the edge of the Orion Arm. The Elithari delegation, an ancient, peaceful species that had existed for over 1,000,000 years, said nothing. They watched, they listened, and behind their calm faces, they were afraid. Commander Rethus was alive. He had been aboard a patrol destroyer at the edge of the battle when the human fleet arrived. His ship had been hit by a gravity beam that tore off the rear third of the vessel, killing most of the crew. But the forward section held together, spinning through the debris field with its emergency power flickering. Rethus dragged himself to the communications console and sent a transmission to the Velari homeworld. His scales were cracked, his left arm was broken, and green blood dripped from a wound above his eye. But his voice was steady. This is Commander Rethus of the patrol destroyer Burning Claw. The border fleet is gone. All of it. The humans, they are not what we thought they were. They are not what anyone thought they were. Recall every ship, fortify every position, and if you have gods, pray to them now. The message was received. This time, no one laughed. But Earth was not finished. Before the wreckage of the Velari fleet had even cooled, the Leviathan ships broadcast a message. Not to the Velari, not to the Concord, to everyone. Every planet, every station, every ship in the galaxy received it simultaneously. It was not a declaration of war. It was a list. 200 years of history, compiled with absolute precision. Every trade restriction unfairly imposed on human merchants. Every colony application denied without reason. Every diplomatic insult. Every time a human ship was searched, seized, or turned away. Every species that had sold humanity faulty technology had inflated prices. Every vote in the Concord that had been used to keep humanity weak. And then Elysium. The names. All 11 million of them, scrolling across every screen in the galaxy. It took hours for the list to finish. Children, farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors, 11 million names, and not one of them had been a soldier. The message ended with a single line, translated into every known language in the galaxy. We asked for peace. You gave us graves. Now we choose the terms. The galaxy read the list, and for the first time, the galaxy felt something it had never felt toward humanity before. Fear. The Leviathan fleet reached the Velari core system 3 days later. The Velari homeworld, a massive, hot planet called Velcathar, was defended by its final reserve fleet. 300 ships, orbital defense stations, and ground-based energy cannons. The defenders expected a battle. They expected fire and death, and the kind of brutal assault that the Velari themselves were famous for. That is not what happened. The Leviathan ships did not fire a single shot. Instead, they deployed thousands of small satellites, silver spheres no larger than a person's head. The satellites spread out in a perfect grid around the entire planet, forming a shell that covered Velcathar from pole to pole. Then they activated. A wall of energy sprang to life around the planet. It was invisible to the eye, but absolute in its effect. Nothing could pass through it. No ship, no missile, no signal, no light. The Velari reserve fleet, trapped inside the barrier, fired everything they had at the energy wall. Their weapons hit it and disappeared. They rammed ships against it. The ships crumbled like paper against stone. The barrier held. On the surface of Velcathar, communications went dead. The sky, usually filled with the lights of orbiting stations and passing ships, went dark. The entire planet, home to 9 billion Velari, was sealed inside an impenetrable shell. Earth called it the cage. No one got in, no one got out. No messages, no trade, no help, total isolation. The galaxy watched and realized something that made their blood run cold. Earth had not come to destroy the Velari. Destruction would have been easier. Destruction would have been merciful. Earth had come to punish them, and there was not a single force in the galaxy that could stop it. The Concord Council met again. This time, no one suggested fighting the humans. No one suggested sanctions or warnings or diplomatic measures. They sat in their thousands of seats and stared at the empty space where humanity's chair should have been all along. And they were silent. The galaxy did not sleep well after Carval threshold. On 100 different worlds, governments held emergency meetings behind locked doors. Intelligence agencies pulled every file they had on humanity and read them again with new eyes. Military commanders looked at their fleets that had once seemed powerful, and did quiet calculations in their heads. The numbers were not comforting. But it was not just the military power that frightened them. It was the list. Earth's broadcast had included everything. 2 centuries of records, organized by species, by date, by offense. Every civilization that had cheated, insulted, exploited, or ignored humanity now had their crimes displayed for the entire galaxy to see. And many of those civilizations had done far worse than they wanted anyone to know. The Dravasi, a wealthy merchant species, had been selling humans defective medical equipment at triple the standard price for decades. When their entry in the list was broadcast, their stock markets crashed within hours. The Morvani Collective, who controlled several key trade routes, had been quietly redirecting human cargo ships into dangerous space lanes where pirate attacks were common. The Morvani ambassador resigned before the day was over. Across the galaxy, governments began purging their own records. Diplomats who had once mocked humanity now sent long, careful messages to Earth, expressing their deep respect and sincere desire for partnership. Military leaders who had publicly called humans primitive suddenly discovered a new appreciation for human culture. Fear does what centuries of diplomacy could not. It makes people honest. Ambassador Idris Okonkwo returned to Nexus Prime for the 18th time. But this visit was nothing like the others. When his shuttle docked at the station, a full honor guard was waiting for him. 12 species stood in formation along the corridor, their ceremonial weapons held in salute. The same corridor where he had once been forced to wait for hours was now cleared, polished, and lined with flowers from 6 different worlds. Idris walked through it all without expression. He had learned long ago how to wear a calm face. But this time, the calm was not hiding frustration. It was hiding grief. He entered the council chamber. The noise that usually filled the room, the chatter, the arguments, the casual disrespect, was gone. 4,000 representatives sat in perfect silence. And in the center of the chamber, on the main floor, a new seat had been placed. It was made of dark wood from earth, oak, polished to a deep shine. And it bore no markings, no symbols, no decorations. It was simple and solid, like the people it represented. No one had asked if humanity wanted a seat. They had simply put it there, because they were afraid of what would happen if they did not. Idris sat down. He placed his hands on his knees and looked up at the thousands of faces staring at him. He said nothing. He did not need to. The silence spoke for him. But not everyone on Earth was celebrating. In the cities, New York, Lagos, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, millions of people took to the streets, not in support of the war, in opposition to it. They carried signs that read, "Justice, not vengeance," and "We are not them." They chanted the names of the Elysium dead, not as a battle cry, but as a prayer. The protesters did not deny that the Velari had committed a terrible crime. They did not argue that Earth should forgive and forget, but they feared what their species was becoming. The cage troubled them. 9 billion beings sealed inside an energy prison, cut off from food shipments, medical supplies, and contact with the rest of the galaxy. Children lived on Velcathar too. Families. People who had nothing to do with the decision to bomb Elysium. Was this justice, or was this revenge wearing the mask of justice? Dr. Lena Vasquez asked herself the same question every night. She stood in her office deep beneath the Sahara, surrounded by screens showing real-time data from the cage. Environmental readings from Velcathar showed rising temperatures, falling food reserves, and increasing civil unrest. The Veltari people were not starving yet, but they would be soon. She had built the cage herself, designed every satellite, every energy frequency, every fail-safe. It was elegant, efficient, and completely merciless. And now, watching the data scroll past her tired eyes, she wondered if she had built a weapon or a mirror. Were they any different from the Velthari now? On the far side of the galaxy, in a temple that had stood for 800,000 years, the Ilithari elder Sorvan requested a private meeting with Earth's Secretary General. The Ilithari were the oldest living civilization in the galaxy. They had watched empires rise and fall like tides. They had seen wars that burned entire star systems and peace that lasted 10,000 years. And through it all, they had remained neutral, patient, and deeply, deeply cautious. Sorvan was their oldest living member. No one knew exactly how old he was, not even the other Ilithari. His body was thin and translucent, like a creature made of glass, and his voice sounded like wind passing through empty rooms. He met the Secretary General in a small chamber on Nexus Prime. No guards, no cameras, no records. Just 2 leaders sitting across from each other. "I will not waste your time with pleasantries," Sorvan said. "You are angry. Your anger is justified. What the Velthari did to your people was an abomination. The Concord's refusal to act was a disgrace. You have every right to do what you are doing." The Secretary General nodded. "Then why are you here?" "Because I have seen this before." Sorvan's translucent hands folded together. His voice dropped, becoming quieter, older, heavier. 300,000 years ago, there was a species called the Caliph. They were much like you, young, passionate, brilliant, and they were betrayed by those who should have protected them. They built weapons in secret, just as you did. They unleashed those weapons when pushed too far, just as you have. And they burned so bright that the galaxy dimmed for 12,000 years. What happened to the Caliph? They won. They defeated everyone who had wronged them. They crushed every enemy, dismantled every institution that had failed them, and stood alone at the center of the galaxy with more power than any single species had ever held. Sorvon paused. And then they could not stop. The rage that had saved them consumed them. They turned on each other. They destroyed themselves. And the rest of us spent millennia picking up the pieces. The room was very quiet. You are not the first to rage, Sorvon said. But you may be the first who can still stop. The question is whether you will. The Secretary General stared at the ancient being for a long time. Then she stood up and left without a word. But Sorvon saw her hands. They were shaking. 3 days later, Dr. Vasquez walked into the Earth Defense Council's war room. The generals were there. The Secretary General was there. The screens on the walls showed fleet positions, cage diagnostics, and galactic news feeds filled with fear and speculation. Vasquez placed a single data chip on the table. It was small, silver, and plain. "What is that?" the Secretary General asked. "The shutdown codes for Project Fenrir," Vasquez said, "and the deactivation sequence for the cage." The room erupted. Generals argued. Voices rose. Someone slammed a fist on the table. The words weakness and surrender were thrown around like weapons. Vasquez waited for the noise to stop. Then she spoke, and her voice was the quietest sound in the room, and somehow the loudest. "We proved our point. The galaxy knows what we can do. Every species, every government, every military commander in the Concord now understands that we could destroy them if we chose to. That knowledge will never go away. It is permanent. It is enough." She looked at the Secretary General. "Now prove we are worth following, not because they fear us, because they believe in us." The Secretary General looked at the data chip. She looked at her generals. She looked at the screens showing a caged world and a frightened galaxy. The cage came down on a Thursday. It happened without warning, without ceremony, and without a single word of explanation. One moment, the energy barrier around Velcathar was there, absolute, unbreakable, terrifying. The next moment, it was gone. The silver satellites folded themselves into small cubes and drifted silently into orbit, powered down and waiting. On the surface of the Velthari homeworld, 9 billion beings looked up at a sky they had not seen in 6 months. Stars, ships, light. The universe had returned. And then the human ships appeared. Not warships this time. Transport vessels, massive, white, and clearly unarmed. They descended through the atmosphere in long, slow lines, like birds returning after winter. When they landed, their cargo doors opened, and out came food, water, medicine, blankets, generators, building materials, everything that the Velthari needed to survive, delivered by the very species that had locked them away. The first Velthari to approach the human supply stations did so with weapons raised and fear in their eyes. They expected a trap. They expected cruelty dressed up as kindness. What they found instead were human aid workers, tired, nervous, but stubbornly determined to help, unloading crates and setting up medical tents as if this were the most natural thing in the world. A Velthari mother brought her sick child to one of the medical tents. The child had a respiratory infection that had gone untreated for weeks. A human doctor, a young woman from a city called Mumbai, examined the child, administered medicine, and handed the mother a blanket. The Velthari mother stared at the doctor with an expression that had no name in any language. It was confusion and gratitude and shame all at once. The doctor simply said, "Your child will be fine." Word spread across Velcathar within hours. The humans were not here to conquer. They were not here to gloat. They were here to feed people. The political earthquake came next. For 6 months, the Velthari people had lived in darkness and isolation. They had been told nothing about what was happening outside the cage. Their military leadership had controlled all information, all resources, and all power. But the cage had exposed the truth that the Velthari generals had tried to hide, that it was their decision to attack Elysium that had brought this punishment upon the entire planet. Their arrogance had nearly starved a world. The anger of the Velthari people did not turn outward, it turned inward. Within days of the cage coming down, protests erupted in every major Velthari city. Millions marched on the capital, demanding the removal of the military government. The generals tried to restore order, but their soldiers, the same soldiers who had gone hungry inside the cage while the generals ate well, refused to fire on their own people. The Velthari military government fell in 11 days. It did not end with a battle. It ended with a door opening and a group of old generals walking out in chains, arrested not by humans, but by their own citizens. Commander Rethus, who had spent the past 6 months as a prisoner of war aboard a human ship, was asked to return home and help form a new government. He was not a politician. He was not a leader. He was a mid-ranking officer who had tried to warn his people and been ignored. But that was exactly why the Velthari people trusted him. He accepted, and the first thing he did was send a message to Earth. It was short: "We are ready to talk." The talks did not happen on Nexus Prime. They did not happen on Earth or on Velcathar. They happened on Elysium. It was Ambassador Okonkwo's idea. If the galaxy was going to build something new, it should be built on the ground where the old order had failed. The ground where 11 million people had died because no one cared enough to stop it. Representatives from over 200 species traveled to Elysium for the conference. They walked through the ruins. They saw the ash fields, the melted foundations, the memorial walls where human volunteers had carved the names of the dead into stone. They saw the scale of what had been lost, and many of them looked away in shame. Ambassador Okonkwo did not ask the galaxy to feel guilty. He asked them to do better. He presented the Alisium Accords, not a peace treaty, but a complete rebuilding of galactic governance. In its place, Earth proposed a new assembly, where every species, regardless of size or age or military power, had an equal voice. No more tiered classifications. No more backroom deals. No more silent annexations. Full transparency. Full accountability. And a new rule that would have prevented Elysium from ever happening. Any attack on a civilian population would trigger an automatic, unified response from the entire assembly. Not a committee, not a review, action. The debates lasted 2 weeks. Some species resisted. Old powers did not want to give up their privileges, but the Leviathan fleet was still in orbit above Elysium, a silent reminder that Earth's offer of partnership came with an alternative that no one wanted to test. One by one, the species signed. Commander Rethus and Captain Amara Diallo met for the last time on the day the Accords were signed. They had spoken many times during Rethus's captivity. At first, their conversations had been cold and formal, a prisoner and his guard. But over the months, something unexpected had grown between them. Not friendship exactly. Something deeper and stranger. A mutual recognition that they were both soldiers who had been used by forces larger than themselves. They stood on a balcony overlooking the Elysium Memorial. Below them, delegates from across the galaxy mingled and talked. Above them, ships from 100 worlds drifted through the sky. "I did not bomb your colony," Rethus said quietly, "but I served the empire that did. I wore their uniform. I followed their orders. That makes me responsible. Diallo looked at him. Her face was hard and tired, but her eyes were not unkind. "I helped cage your planet," she said. 9 billion people, sealed in darkness, because of what your leaders did. Children went hungry because of my mission. That makes me responsible too. They stood in silence for a while. "What do we do now?" Rethus asked. "We do better," Diallo said. "That is all anyone can do." A photographer captured them standing together at the railing. A Velari commander and a human captain, side by side, looking out at a world that was slowly being reborn. The image spread across the galaxy within hours. It became the symbol of the Alisium Accords, not a picture of victory, but a picture of two people who had every reason to hate each other and chose not to. Dr. Lena Vasquez spent the day of the signing alone. She was in the hangar bay of the Leviathan flagship, overseeing the removal of the gravity beam weapons. The offensive systems were being dismantled and replaced with deep space exploration equipment and emergency rescue modules. The most powerful warships ever built were being turned into the galaxy's largest search and rescue fleet. Project Fenrir was not destroyed. Vasquez had argued against that. Instead, it was sealed in a vault beneath the Himalayas, powered down, locked away, and guarded by systems that only 3 people in the galaxy could override. A sleeping giant. A reminder of what humanity could do, kept in the dark so that it would never need to wake again. As she watched the engineers work, a young technician asked her a question. "Dr. Vasquez, do you think we did the right thing? All of it? The fleet, the cage, the war?" Vasquez was quiet for a long time. "I think we did a terrible thing," she said, "and I think it was necessary, and I think those 2 facts will keep me awake for the rest of my life." Ambassador Okonkwo gave the closing address at the first session of the new Galactic Assembly. He did not speak of power or strategy or the future of interstellar politics. He spoke of a school on Elysium that had 43 students and 2 teachers. He spoke of a farmer named David who grew strawberries in alien soil. He spoke of a girl named Amina who wanted to be an astronaut. He spoke of the 11 million, not as a number, as people. When he finished, the assembly was silent. And then slowly, one by one, every representative in the chamber stood. 4,000 species, standing for the dead of a world they had once ignored. The Ilithari elder Sorvan watched the ceremony from a balcony high above the assembly floor. A younger Ilithari stood beside him, barely 1,000 years old. "What do you think of them?" the younger one asked. "The humans?" Sorvan's translucent body shimmered in the light. He watched the small, fragile, short-lived creatures below as they shook hands and embraced beings 10 times their size. "They frightened me," Sorvan said softly, "and then they gave me hope. No species has ever done both." Years passed. The galaxy changed, slowly and imperfectly, the way all real change happens. There were setbacks and arguments, and days when it seemed like the old ways would return, but they did not. The Alisium Accords held. The assembly grew, and humanity, the species that had once been told to wait outside the door, stood at the center of it all, not as conquerors, but as builders. On the rebuilt surface of Elysium, in a park that grew where the ash fields had been, a Velari child and a human child played together in the grass. They chased each other around a fountain, laughing in 2 different languages that somehow meant the same thing. Behind them stood the memorial, a wall of dark stone, stretching for kilometers, carved with 11 million names. At its base, a single line engraved in every language the galaxy had ever spoken. "We remember, so the galaxy never forgets." The children did not read the inscription. They were too busy playing, and perhaps that was the point. The memorial was not for them. It was for everyone else, a reminder carved in stone that the cost of indifference is always paid in someone else's blood. Above them, the sky was full of ships. They came from everywhere, from old enemies and new friends, from ancient empires and young colonies, from every corner of a galaxy that had finally learned to look up and see not strangers, but neighbors. Earth had unleashed its wrath, and the galaxy had realized too late what humanity truly was. Not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most advanced, the most stubborn, the most patient, and, in the end, the most willing to forgive. That was what made them dangerous, and that was what made them worth following.